Resources are the topic of Chapter 4. Resources can be a wide variety of things, anything that is useful and has some purpose for an individual. One of the issues is that most people or many people think of resources only being financial resources. When they think of resources, the term resources, they only consider money and not all of the other resources that they have available to them. Resources can be expertise, time, people. The people in your life are a really important resource. It can be money, but it can also be the skills that you have in order to earn money. In this lecture, we'll talk about several things related to resources. We'll talk about what resources are. Resources are basically anything that's available to be used. We'll talk about the characteristics of resources, what makes something a resource. We'll also go over resources in economics, a little bit about scarcity and a shortage of supply and how that is related to resources. We'll also talk about resource advantage theory. Resource advantage theory is based on the idea of entrepreneurship and leverage, or using our resources more efficiently and effectively. Resource utility, we'll talk about the different classifications of how a resource can be useful, what makes a resource useful in different scenarios, and also some of the things regarding how resources and families have changed over time. We can't reach the goals that we set without having resources. One of the main steps in reaching our goals or getting where we want to be is assessing the resources that we have and then using those resources effectively. Resources are what is available to be used. It's natural and human wealth that is used to satisfy human needs. Resources aren't only monetary or physical, such as a house or $100. Anything with real or perceived value is a resource or can be a resource. So for example, air, time, a skill that you have, these are all resources. Even a sense of humor can be a resource if it's used to get where you want to be. So anything with real or perceived value that you use to get to reach some point is a resource. Everyone has a unique set of resources and uses the resources that they have differently. It's important when you're trying to reach your goals to try to think about the resources that you have and how you can use them to reach your goals, particularly if you have a career or if you're in a career that requires entrepreneurship. Resources help individuals create output. One of the characteristics of resources is that they have some use. They contribute to your ability to produce some form of output. Many resources are found in limited quantity. For example, time is limited. Every person has only 24 hours per day, only 7 days per week. Money is also a limited resource. The outputs that we produce from these resources may have value for an individual or for the marketplace. For example, a paper that you're writing using a computer, the computer is a resource. That computer might have a different value to you than it does in the marketplace. If your computer is 7 years old, it's still allowing you to produce this paper, but in the marketplace it would have little value. We can use our resources in a variety of ways. This is why it's helpful to assess your resources, particularly before you make big decisions. In the short term, an example of using your resources is thinking about what you'll eat for lunch. Will you exchange $10 to go to a restaurant and buy lunch, or will you spend a smaller amount at the grocery store and make the food yourself? One way to classify resources is whether they are intangible or tangible. Intangible resources are those that we can't touch. These include integrity, confidence, even a sense of humor can be an intangible resource. Whenever you're thinking or making a plan or making some decision, it's important to think of some of your intangible resources, whether you have knowledge in a specific area, certain skills that you have from a job 5 years ago, a certain language you can speak that would help you in your future career. Tangible resources are those that can be touched, that can be appraised. These include jewelry, land, houses, or money, things that you can see and put a specific value on. We often think of these tangible resources as being more important, but these tangible resources actually can be taken away much more easily than the intangible resources that you have. Another way to classify resources that is similar to looking at intangible versus tangible resources is looking at whether they're human resources or material resources. Human resources are things that people possess in terms of skills, talents, or abilities. These human resources increase through their use. For example, the more years you spend working as a property manager, the more skill and knowledge you have in that area, and the greater human resources particular to that you have. Some other examples of human resources are emotion, friendships. These are human resources. Knowing how to ride a bike is a human resource. These all increase through using them, and with practice increase. Material resources, on the other hand, are natural resources as well as human-made items such as buildings, money, or computers. The natural resources include water, oil, trees. These material resources decrease through use in contrast to the human resources. These material resources such as buildings, water, computers, for example, buildings deteriorate, water is limited, and computers become outdated over time. There are a few other terms that are important when talking about resources. The first term is human capital. Human capital includes all of the capabilities and traits that people use to achieve their goals. It's the store of our knowledge and our experience. One of the goals of education is to increase human capital. For example, by going to college, you are investing in your human capital development. When parents pay for tuition for their children, they are also investing in their students' human capital. Another term is resource stock. This is the sum total of the readily available resources an individual has. You can look at your resource stock to make and implement decisions. For example, when you're choosing a college, you would look at all of the resources you had available. You would look at whether you have a family member you could live with if you went to a certain college, the resources you have available to pay tuition, the resources you have to attend a college that's maybe more difficult. It includes the material resources you have available in addition to your human resources at one time. Although resources include other things other than money and our financial resources, most of our decisions are affected by the economic reality or the economic situation that we're in. Scarcity is what forces us to make choices and decisions about how to allocate our resources. For example, leisure time in today's world is scarce. That forces us to make decisions about allocating our resources, including time and money. In order to have more leisure time, we might have to spend less time studying or working, but if we then decrease the hours that we spend working, that means we have a decrease in money. So there's always a trade-off. This is a complex decision, and the end goal is to maximize our resources, which is one of the basics of economics. Every decision that we make has a cost. This is the opportunity cost, or the opportunity that we lose by choosing one alternative. Choosing a college that has a better reputation. When you choose that college, you're foregoing a college with a perhaps lower or lesser reputation, but the tuition might be lower. Another example is if you choose to go out with your friends rather than to go to work, the money that you forgo that you would have earned from working would be a dollar opportunity cost. Economic well-being refers to the degree or extent of protection against economic risks such as unemployment, something that would happen from illness, protection against bankruptcy, poverty, living in poverty in old age. It's the degree to which we have economic adequacy as well as security. Economic well-being is a function of a combination of variables. It's not just having money. It also includes having assets, having human capital, the ability to earn money, having time to do the things you need to do, having job security, and so on. A big part of economic well-being is education. As a group overall, more educated people have higher incomes and the ability to earn money now and in the future, and that contributes to economic well-being. Using our resources more efficiently and planning how to use our resources are two ways to improve economic well-being. For example, if you're looking at two families who are identical in terms of having the same house, the same car, the same income, they're not necessarily the same in terms of economic well-being. One of those households might have better job security. One might have more debt that makes them less economically secure. Human capital, if one household has family members who are more educated and more able to earn money, that makes the difference in economic well-being. One framework developed to explain or to look at the use of resources is resource advantage theory. Resource advantage theory actually comes from the field of marketing, but has many features that make it applicable to the field of resource management. Resource advantage theory applies entrepreneurship and leveraging to resource management. Entrepreneurship involves creating value by bringing together a unique group of resources in order to exploit an opportunity. Within your field, being entrepreneurial or using certain resources together in order to create value and exploit some opportunity is important for advancing your career, or in specific careers can be more important than others. Leveraging refers to using your resources more effectively by using creativity, whether it's stretching resources, using or thinking of ways that you can use resources in new ways, working synergistically with another to join the resources you have and get a better outcome than you would have had with just using those resources separately. These are all ways to use leveraging in order to exploit an opportunity. The main idea is using your resources to your own advantage in order to have a better outcome. Utility is the value or worth or usefulness of a resource. There are several different ways to talk about the utility or usefulness of a resource. The first is time utility. This is having the resource available when you actually need it. One example is if you are going to the DMV to get your license, if you show up to the DMV and it's closed, it's a useless activity and has no utility in terms of getting your license. Place utility is referring to the location. If you arrive for a meeting and you go to the wrong building or to the wrong room, there's no utility of that resource. There's no usefulness of the activity. Form utility is having the resource in accessible and usable form. If I sent you a copy of the lecture notes in a PowerPoint file and you don't have PowerPoint on your computer, there's no form utility and no usefulness to that file or sending that file or resource. And another term is diminishing utility. This is where the first use of a resource is more desirable than later use of the resource. When you get a piece of cake, the first slice of cake is eating that first slice of cake is much better than eating your 10th slice of cake. Over the last 30 years, families and households in the United States and in many countries around the world have undergone many changes in terms of demographics, in terms of household structure, and all of these changes have a large effect on the field of resource management. It affects how we look at families and what we need to consider when we are looking at families. One of the changes over the last 30 years is increased labor force participation among women. Women are more likely to be in the labor force and to be working for longer hours if they are in the labor force than they were 30 years ago. There's been an increase in the number of households. However, these households are smaller than they were in the past. This is a result of people having less children, people staying single for longer. It's also the result of divorce among people. So there are smaller households, but there are more households, a greater number of households. Another change is the increase in the number of single-parent families. Again, this is a result of divorce and people having children outside of marriage. Another significant change is the aging of the population. People are living longer due to medical advances, and also there's a decrease in the fertility rate. So people are having less children and people are living longer. These are two things that are contributing to the aging population. One of the things that's changed in households over the last 30 years is that women have entered the workforce. With women entering the workforce, many people think that things are now egalitarian or that household work is split up equally between the spouses. However, studies show that women still do 2/3 of housework. So in contrast to the increase in time spent by mothers in the workforce, fathers' complementary behavior in family caregiving and other household chores has not changed as quickly. The work that's done by fathers has increased over time, but according to research, it still remains limited. The decrease in the number of family households is part of that decrease in the number of total households. Although there has been this decrease in the number of family households, the majority of Americans do still live in family households. This is one of the concepts that people seem to misunderstand. They think that with this decrease in the number of family households that the majority are not in family households. However, they still are. This change in the structure of households and the decrease in the number of family households affects how the resources are used within families, as well as what resources people do have within their households. And that's one of the important things to consider whenever we're looking at resource management. Households with two spouses and children will have very different resources than a household with only one spouse and children, or even vice versa, where there's two spouses and no children, or one person without a spouse. The resources that they have are different, and then the resources will also be used differently.